So I mentioned before the show started, we have a guest joining us. He's joining us by phone. Before we get him on, I just want to show you his book. This is a gentleman named Victor Davis Hanson. This is his book. I'm hoping you can see it. I'm holding up for you to see it. You can order it on Amazon. In fact, on my website, americacanwetalk.org, on the homepage under shows, drop down list of links. I put a link to the page. You can order this off of Amazon. It's called The Case for Trump by Dr. Victor Davis Hanson, who's joining us in a moment. I will tell you this. So he came and spoke last week in Dallas, and I was able to go to that event. And someone who sat at our table at this luncheon where he was speaking commented to me, she said, I voted for Trump in 2016 very cautiously, a little bit timidly, but I couldn't go with the Democrats, so I went with President Trump. Well, she talked about, and this is a very wonky friend of mine, very, very substantive thinker. She read this book, and her comment at the luncheon was, this book made me feel so much better about my vote, about where we're headed as a country. So what I want to say to you, my friends, as you listen to, talk to Dr. Hanson, consider buying this book and buying it for your friends who may be kind of wavering Republicans who think, well, I'm usually Republican, but I'm a little bit dicey about President Trump. Because I think President Trump is actually doing a tremendous job. I think the book will help you understand great ways to explain to people why it is we're on a great path with President Trump. And with that, I believe we have Dr. Victor Davis Hanson online. Hello, sir.
Hello.
Great to have you. So glad you could join us today. So first of all, I commend you on your book. And, you write so many columns. I'm kind of jumping around thinking, I want to talk about so many of them. But I want to focus. Let me just quickly tell our listeners, I believe most of our listeners know, but Victor Davis Hanson, he is a senior fellow at Stanford University Hoover Institution. His focus is classics and military history. He has a long series of awards for his academic writing, his teaching, he's just a wonderful columnist and thinker, historian and military historian. And in fact, many of you remember the show. We've had Raymond Ibrahim on the show twice, who I believe worked under Dr. Hanson writing his book. So he's just a scholar extraordinary. Very happy to have him join us. So, sir, you wrote this column, and as a historian, this is what I want to dive in and ask you about. So you wrote a column relating to where we are in this country in 2020, dealing with the ongoing and unsettled business of the alleged Trump-Russia collusion, the Russian hoax, what was seemed to have been cooked up inside the Department of Justice, the FBI, in bringing a whole investigation of President Trump, which was unfounded, related to allegations of supposed collusion with Russia. And you characterize it in your column called The Once and Future Scandal as one of the most serious scandals in American history. So I want to start with, as a historian, why do you characterize this particular scandal? And even though we're still in the middle of it, but how do you see it as one of the most important scandals in American history?
Well, it had all the elements of an effort to really wreck the Constitution and the electoral process, which is very ironic because that's what they accused the victim of this sort of conspiracy. And by that I mean, think about it. We had foreign nationals, in this case, Christopher Steele, a British subject, who was using sources from Russia that were unverified. And some of the sources have even said that even their sensational rumors were mischaracterized by Steele, who then created a dossier which, through 3 firewalls, was hired by Hillary Clinton and then peddled and seeded at the Department of Justice, the CIA, and the FBI, all for the express purpose of destroying the Trump candidacy. In fact, 2 articles at least appeared about the dossier before the election. And then it was used again to warp the FISA court process, to spy illegally on an American citizen in hope of ricocheting off him and then trapping more Trump campaign, mostly minor campaign officials. And this was in context with the CIA and the FBI, but largely the CIA, I think, using foreign informants to get information on the Trump campaign. And all of this was put into menus or intelligence assessments that were shown to the Department of Justice, Loretta Lynch, and Barack Obama, apparently, at the intelligence briefing. And then on top of this, we had people like Samantha Power and Susan Rice requesting from the National Security Agency and other intelligence groups that the names of Americans that had been masked be unmasked, and some of those names of people who were surveilled were then leaked to the press. So it was a systematic effort across the major bureaucracies, mostly justice and intelligence bureaucracies, to first destroy the Trump campaign and then to abort his transition and then to hurt his presidency. And it's still going on. We have a lot of holdovers in the National Security Council, just to take one example, the National Security Council staff, I should say, that grew to 230 under Obama. And Donald Trump just let go 70, but that's a day late and a dollar short. We're in the fourth year of his presidency, and we know that, for example, the Vindman twins, one of them who authorized John Bolton's memoir, said there was no conflict. The other person who was in contact with the whistleblower himself, two members of Adam Schiff's present congressional staff that worked on impeachment. All of those people came out of the Trump White House, and they were actively leaking and doing business with his political opposition, diplomatic corps, people like Fiona Hill, all as in an effort to hurt his presidency. And so I don't think we've ever seen such a systematic breakdown of government, in the sense that it became entirely politicized and tried to destroy a particular political candidate and president.
Dr. Hanson, that was a great summary, and I was just going to just very slightly expand on that, or maybe be repetitious, but it is the highest levels of our national law enforcement. It wasn't a rogue field office in Cleveland. It was the highest levels, seemingly, of within the Department of Justice, FBI, perhaps the CIA, all of that, NSA, people more or less aware of what was occurring, and the mission wasn't, as some other scandals may have been, to mishandle money, to extort, to get foreign policy slightly changed. It was to bring down the presidency, bring down the candidate, and then the presidency. I concur. I could not agree more strongly. It's the most astonishing and brazen and yet unresolved scandal we have ever addressed in this country. But I want to, you mentioned, I think in your article, I think you mentioned how during the Senate impeachment trial, Adam Schiff, Democrat member of Congress from California, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, still spoke in his impeachment, which didn't have anything to do with the Trump-Russia collusion, but still they're trying to impeach the president, still made reference to the seeming to imply that he believed it to be the case, that the Trump-Russia collusion really happened. We just didn't prove it or couldn't get to the bottom of it. We seem to be operating in two parallel universes in Washington.
Yeah. But what's disturbing is one of these universes is anti-constitutional and insurrectionary. By that I mean we, the taxpayers, paid $35 million, 22 months, 88 weeks of constant illegal leaking out of the Mueller investigation, 500 subpoenas, and this all-star dream team, hunter-killer team that the press was so happy because it was partisan, found nothing about collusion. And yet here's Adam Schiff talking about Trump figuratively or imaginatively selling Alaska to Russia. That's what he said on the floor. How could we stop him if he were to do that? And what my point is that it's almost as if an American is indicted. He goes into a trial. The DA then finds out that the indictments are having no resonance with the judge or the jury, and then all of a sudden he said, "Oh, by the way, we're going to charge you with something else. I just thought of another crime." You can't. He would be disbarred and thrown out of court. And so this is what we're doing now, and it's all justified on the idea that Trump poses some existential threat to the republic, and therefore any means necessary to abort his presidency are justified. And these are by people with Harvard law degrees, or the top people of our so-called elite. In the case of the FISA courts, Sally Yates, Rod Rosenstein, James Comey, John Brennan, James Clapper, Andrew McCabe. We know all of these people have either lied under oath or leaked classified documents or deluded or tried to warp a FISA court judge, so that if you or I did that, we'd be charged with a felony in 2 seconds. James Comey leaked classified secret conversations of presidential conversations that he recorded or memorialized on FBI documents. He leaked it to the press for the express purpose of getting a special prosecutor appointed, special counsel who was, and it was his friend and former predecessor at the predecessor of the FBI, Robert Mueller. And remember, the only reason he didn't go to jail was because post facto, months later, a committee at the FBI at the Washington office decided that those private conversations with the president were not secret. And who was on that committee? Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. So they say, you know what, there was nothing wrong with James Comey leaking these things, and we've now retroactively reclassified or classified them for the first time as not top secret, merely confidential. You can see the level of intrigue and corruption, and this is not even getting into Mr. Kleinsmith, the person who forged the document, FBI lawyer, or Lisa Page, and the amorous texts where they talked of insurance policies. 12 of the top FBI Washington officials, James Baker, Rebecca, all have resigned or retired or were transferred or were fired. So it's pretty disturbing. And the reason that we're not, I guess, in a critical mood right now, and the Republic is not shocked about it, is that the media saw all of this as tolerable because they shared the same aim of removing Trump as did the FBI and the CIA.
Yeah, could not agree more. The word I've used frequently in my show about the conduct of the Democrats is just, it's so audacious that I think people almost get desensitized. They think so many things happen, and more implications and more wrongdoing and more cover up and more deception. At some point, when you keep talking about it, people get desensitized. They almost say, well, we've been hearing these words for so long, it really couldn't be that bad. I want to shift because I want to honor your time. I want to shift and talk, though, about the investigation that Attorney General Barr has announced. I think it was about May of this year when he was testifying before the Senate and saying he was going to ask for a special investigation by U.S. Attorney and appointed U.S. Attorney John Durham to look into as his word was, the predicate or the genesis of the entire Trump-Russia collusion hoax. How did it get started and who did that? So he appointed them, and he appointed John Durham, U.S. Attorney Durham, who's been looking into it. And there seems to be increasing clamor, including from myself, wondering what is taking so long? Do you feel, I want to ask, as a historian or observer, just an astute observer of politics, are you concerned with how long this investigation is taking, Durham and Barr's investigation, into looking into and rooting out what happened inside the FBI?
No, I was worried that he was not classifying it or characterizing it as a criminal investigation, but a few months ago he did do that. And now at that point I'm a little bit relieved, because I think the longer it goes on, the more thorough and the more damning it's going to be, because there's certain things that everybody knows happened, and it's just a matter of finding corroborating evidence. And I think what we're going to see in the summer or the fall is that when these indictments start to come, a James Clapper or an Andrew McCabe or a John Brennan or a James Comey or their subordinates, a Bruce Orr or Sally Orr, whoever they are going to start talking, and they're going to start explaining what their role was in efforts to get a reduced sentence. And I think it's going to be pretty shocking, because and we have to remember also that James Brennan has already admitted that on 2 occasions he lied under oath to the U.S. Senate, once about the Senate staffer computers and once about the drone program. And then James Clapper also lied when he talked about NSA surveillance. Both of them under oath, both of them had no consequence. So they don't have a reputation for honesty, and that's going to be, I think, important. But when they come out and say, I said this, and somebody, how dare you question my integrity, people are going to know, well, your integrity doesn't exist. You've already admitted and apologized for lying to the U.S. Senate under oath. And we should also remember Adam Schiff was the chief prosecutor of the impeachment from the House, and he appeared in that role in the Senate. And this is a person who read in a fraudulent version of the Trump phone call. He data mined his own colleagues' telephone records. He lied about his relationship with the whistleblower, or his staff's relationship with the whistleblower. As you mentioned, he mischaracterized collusion, which was already found to be non-existent by a special counsel. And he gave a memo. He had a minority memo about the House Intelligence Committee findings where he disagreed with the majority Nunes memo, and he attacked Nunes. And then Michael Horowitz, the Inspector General, found that most of everything that was in the Schiff memo was false, deliberately so. So any other time in history, he would have been censored by his colleagues, and that didn't happen. And you can really see why these elections are important, because had the Democrats not taken the majority a year and a half ago, we wouldn't have had any of this impeachment circus, and we would have had a lot more subpoenas and a lot more rapidity in finding out what happened. But that loss of the House made an enormous difference. That propelled Nancy Pelosi and Gerald Nadler and Schiff into positions of power, and then it brought in people like the Squad, and they had enormous influence on the mainstream Democratic politicians.
Well, that may be a good segue. They sure did. It may be a great segue to my last quick questions related to the New Hampshire primary. It seems like the presence of the Squad in the U.S. House, and they're very, two of them are open members of the Democrat Socialists of America. And now we've had our second primary in New Hampshire. We have Bernie Sanders out in the lead. And I'm curious your reaction to the Democrats' New Hampshire primary. Do you think that the establishment in the Democrat Party is getting concerned about who's going to emerge as their actual candidate to challenge President Trump? And if so, do you think they're going to work to undermine Bernie Sanders this time? Or do you think their party shifted so far left, they're saying, hey, what the heck, we're socialists now?
Well, I think there's the party, and then there's the donor class and the people in Congress. And that's still people who are worried about Bernie Sanders, not because they're not socialists, just because they understand that if he were on the top of the ticket, they'd lose the Senate and they'd be wiped out in the House. They would not gain back the Senate. They would lose Senate seats and they would lose the House. So they're concerned, and they're trying to, they look at the demographics and the analytics, and they say to themselves, if you tally up Biden and you tally up Buttigieg and Klobuchar, we still have a majority of non-socialist votes. But what the Republicans learned that with Trump, that you can't get a candidate to voluntarily withdraw and give their votes to somebody else. So the idea that Biden is going to pull out and say, vote for Mayor Pete or vote for Senator Klobuchar is not going to happen. And so that, I think that means that as the strongest of the candidates, but a clearly minority candidate in terms of votes, that Bernie Sanders is on his way to get the nomination. I know he's 78, he's not in great health. He's got a long campaign ahead of him, and I think he's the likely person to get the nomination. And what's scary about it is, in normal times, he wouldn't have a chance. It'll be like 1972, but who knows what can happen in these times. I mean, Trump has a very rigorous schedule. He's 73 years old. He's not in the greatest of health. And when you put a socialist on a national ticket and you have an election on that, that's a very scary thing, no matter what the chances are of him winning or losing. He has very little chance of winning the national election in November, but the fact that he's on the ballot is frightening in the manner that, George McGovern was.
Absolutely true. Dr. Hanson, this is just such an illuminating and fun conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today. I will pile on your last point about Bernie Sanders. Many Republicans say, I'd love to have the national political conversation. Let us have Trump and the Trump economy and the strength of our country now, and everything's going well. Let the Democrats put up Bernie Sanders and let's have a conversation about socialism. I've said that myself. But if we're going to invite that conversation in this country, we better be ready, not just the president, not just the candidates, but everyday Americans in every facet of life. You've got to be ready to explain to people that what Bernie Sanders is talking about is not just unrealistic, it is dangerous. It's a healthy, good conversation to have, but patriots and freedom lovers, we need to win that conversation in America. So again, Dr. Hanson, thank you so much for taking time and joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, folks, I have to tell you, this is a true, I don't know if any of our listeners, I'm sure some of you read Dr. Victor Davis Hanson's writing. As I say, he's at the Stanford, the Hoover Institution. He is he writes at American Greatness. He writes at a variety of places, and he has so many great columns out. He had another one I'll quickly mention. I also want to encourage you again about his book, The Case for Trump. Another column he had out that I just thought was really insightful and I want to mention to you, and I can't remember if we linked to it or not, but you can find it. It's called, Is Trump's Unorthodoxy Becoming Orthodox? And it was a really great point that, and he gives examples in his article of the basic point that when candidate Donald Trump was running for the presidency in 2015 and 2016, a lot of things he said seemed so far out of the mainstream of the Republican Party. And a lot of people said, you can't be talking about a wall. I mean, we can't do that. That's like the Great Wall of China. We can't do that. But as he continued to draw the public's attention to the danger of a porous southern border, the impact on crime, the impact on our economy, the impact on our jobs market, the impact on our sense of security, because we have people, not just people crossing the southern border because of poverty in their home countries. We have terrorists, we have cartel members, we have human traffickers. By the time he was done waking America up, President Trump, candidate Trump, waking America up, we went from thinking, well, that's a pretty unorthodox idea. I don't know about this wall idea, to thinking, what else are we going to do? We have to have a secure border. He has made many ideas that were unorthodox orthodox. Again, I urge you to get his book, The Case for Trump. Give it to your friends if they're on the fence. And also just to follow, if you don't follow Victor Davis Hanson, I have to tell you I have his, on Twitter, he's at V as in Victor, D as in Davis, Hanson, Hanson, at VD Hanson, senior fellow at the Hoover Institute, a class. He's written books. He's a brilliant writer, brilliant thinker, wonderful commentator. And I just appreciate him taking time today. And also encourage that he has really helped, I think, the kind of more intellectual Republican, the serious thinker, embrace the idea that Donald Trump is doing exactly what our country needs to have done, even though he may, at the time he was running, have seemed like, and he was, in fact, a very not traditional candidate. So great interview. Thanks very much. I'm so glad Dr. Hanson could join us.